It was a chilly afternoon when Emily, a woman struggling to make ends meet, noticed a man sitting on a bench outside her small coffee shop. His clothes were ragged, his face weary from hunger and hardship. Despite her own troubles, Emily couldn't ignore the sight of him, a man in need. She invited him in, offering him a meal on the house. The man ate in silence, grateful but humble, and when he was done, he left. On the table, he left something behind, not money, but a piece of paper that would soon change Emily's life in ways she could never have imagined. Hi everyone, welcome to Stories of Hope. Today, I'm excited to share a new story with you. It was a quiet Tuesday when Emily first saw the man. The small coffee shop she ran on the edge of town had been struggling for months. Business had slowed, and she could barely afford to keep the place open, but she couldn't bear to let it go. It had been her dream, her refuge after years of hard work. Yet the bills piled up, the nights grew colder, and every morning she woke with a sense of dread in her chest. She had just finished wiping down a table when her eyes caught sight of him. He was sitting on the worn bench just outside the door, staring down at his hands. His face was rough, weathered, and a sad kind of exhaustion hung over him. She could tell he wasn't just tired. He was hungry, deeply hungry. Emily hesitated for a moment, weighing her options. Her own pockets were empty, and the last thing she could afford was to feed a stranger. But something about the man tugged at her heart. She had always believed in kindness, even when times were tough. She took a deep breath, then walked over to the door. "Would you like to come in? I can offer you a warm meal," Emily said, her voice soft but genuine. The man looked up, surprised, and then nodded slowly. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice hoarse from disuse. She guided him inside, her heart racing with the decision she had just made. As he sat down at the corner table, she hurried to the kitchen, where the smell of brewing coffee and baking bread filled the air. She quickly prepared a simple meal, a hearty bowl of soup, warm bread, and a steaming cup of coffee. She wasn't sure why she did it. Maybe it was the way he looked at her, or perhaps it was her own growing sense of helplessness that made her want to do something, anything, to ease his suffering. When she returned, she placed the steaming bowl in front of him, and his eyes widened with surprise. He didn't speak, but his hand trembled slightly as he reached for the spoon. Emily watched from a distance as he ate in silence, his face expressionless, but his movements hurried, as if he feared the meal would be taken away at any moment. The small bell above the door jingled as customers entered and left, but Emily couldn't take her eyes off the man. There was something about him, something deeper than just hunger. He wasn't just an ordinary stranger. When he had finished, the man placed his spoon down carefully. He didn't look at her as he stood up, but instead, he pulled a small piece of paper from his coat pocket and placed it gently on the table. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice barely a whisper. Emily blinked in surprise, but before she could ask him anything else, he turned and left, disappearing into the cold afternoon. She stood there for a moment, staring at the paper. It wasn't money, that much was clear. Her fingers trembled slightly as she unfolded the note. The words were simple, but precise. "This is not just a meal. You will soon find that sometimes giving without expecting anything in return is the key to unlocking a life you could never imagine. Keep your faith." The note was unsigned. Emily's heart raced. What did it mean? Why had he left this for her? She couldn't stop herself from feeling a sense of unease. Had she done something wrong? Or had she unknowingly stepped into a much larger story than she realized? It was then that Emily decided to find out what was behind the stranger's cryptic message. Little did she know, this moment would set her on a path that would change everything. A journey full of mystery, hope, and the kind of unexpected twist that only life could offer. The note lay on the counter for hours, and Emily couldn't bring herself to do anything else. She'd read it over and over again, the words etched in her mind like a puzzle that refused to be solved. This is not just a meal. You will soon find that sometimes giving without expecting anything in return is the key to unlocking a life you could never imagine. Keep your faith. What did it mean? Who was the man? And why had he left her such an odd message? Emily had always been someone who believed in helping others, even when it felt like she had nothing to offer. She had spent years living on the edge, working hard to keep her shop open, and yet it was still a struggle. The thought of helping someone else, despite her own financial hardship, had always brought her a sense of purpose. But this note, it felt different. There was something more to it, something that tugged at her heart in a way that she couldn't explain. As the hours passed, the evening crowd trickled in and out of the coffee shop. Emily tried to focus on her work, but the man's face kept resurfacing in her mind. She'd tried to shake it off, tried to pretend that the moment hadn't made a lasting impression on her, but she couldn't. She'd given him a meal, yes, but he'd given her something far more profound, a question that now consumed her thoughts. The day ended, and as Emily locked up the coffee shop, her mind was still racing. She couldn't let it go. She had to find him, to understand what he meant. The next morning, Emily decided to do something she never thought she would. She put on her coat, grabbed the note, and walked outside the coffee shop. The cold air hit her face as she stepped onto the sidewalk, and the bustling streets of the small town greeted her with their usual hum of activity. She felt a strange sense of urgency, as if something was pulling her forward, telling her to follow the trail the man had left behind. The first place she thought to look was the park, where she had seen him the day before. Maybe he was still there, sitting on the same bench, staring at nothing in particular, just like he had been. She walked briskly through the streets, her footsteps echoing in the quiet morning. As she approached the park, she could feel her heart pounding in her chest, a mixture of hope and nervousness swirling within her. She scanned the park, but the bench was empty. Emily's shoulders slumped, a feeling of disappointment washing over her. She had been so certain that she would find him there, that the mystery would reveal itself with a simple answer. But he was nowhere to be found. As she stood there, feeling defeated, she noticed a familiar face walking toward her, a local police officer named Steve. He was a regular customer at her coffee shop, always cheerful and polite, but Emily hadn't seen him in the last few days. "Hey there, Emily, how's business?" he asked, his voice friendly as he approached. Emily gave him a forced smile. "Oh, you know, it's been slow, just trying to make it through, like always." Steve noticed her downcast expression and raised an eyebrow. "Something on your mind?" Emily hesitated for a moment, but she knew Steve well enough to trust him. She pulled out the note from her pocket and handed it to him. "I met a man yesterday. He left me this. I don't know what it means, but I feel like it's important. Like I'm supposed to figure something out." Steve read the note silently, his brow furrowing. When he finished, he looked up at Emily, his expression unreadable. "I don't know who left this or why, but something tells me you might be onto something. That kind of message. It's not just a coincidence. Maybe you should talk to people in town, see if anyone knows anything about him." Emily nodded slowly. "I guess that's the next step." Steve smiled gently. "You've got a good heart, Emily. Maybe this will lead to something good. Just don't give up." As he walked away, Emily felt a renewed sense of determination. She had to find the man, or at least learn something more about him. The words from the note haunted her, urging her to keep her faith. But what was she supposed to believe in? Faith in people? Faith in kindness? Or was it something deeper, something she couldn't yet grasp? Over the next few days, Emily asked around the town. She spoke to neighbors, shop owners, and even the postman. But no one seemed to know anything about the man she had fed. His face was a blur in their memories, as if he had never really been there. It was as though he had come from nowhere, only to disappear just as mysteriously. But then, one afternoon, as she was closing the shop, Emily saw something that stopped her in her tracks. Across the street, she noticed a small group of people gathered in front of a rundown building that had always been abandoned. The building, once a vibrant community center, had stood empty for years. But now there were voices, loud, arguing voices, coming from inside. Curiosity piqued. Emily crossed the street, feeling the tug of something familiar in the air. As she neared the door, she saw a sign posted on the wall. Community meeting, a new beginning for our town. It was then that Emily realized maybe the man, the stranger who had come into her life, was trying to tell her something bigger than just a meal. She stepped into the building, her heart pounding. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing for sure. Her life was about to change. The room was dimly lit, with a few flickering light bulbs overhead, but the air was thick with anticipation. Emily hesitated at the door for a moment, unsure of what she was walking into. The voices inside were muffled but full of passion, as though people were deeply invested in whatever was happening. She stepped across the threshold, her boots clicking softly on the old wooden floor, the creak of the door unnoticed by the gathering inside. The room was filled with about a dozen people, mostly older men and women, sitting in mismatched chairs around a small wooden table at the center of the room. A map of the town was pinned to the wall, with several notes and circles scrawled around certain locations. Emily's gaze drifted over the scene, her heart pounding as she tried to make sense of what was happening. One of the men, an elderly figure with silver hair and glasses perched at the tip of his nose, noticed her first. He didn't seem startled, as though he had been expecting her. "You're Emily, aren't you?" the man asked, his voice calm but firm. Emily nodded, her throat suddenly dry. "Yes, I'm sorry. I don't know what this meeting is about. I just saw the sign outside and—" He smiled warmly, cutting her off gently. Come in. We were just discussing how we can help the town, turn things around for people like you. And maybe, just maybe, you're exactly who we've been waiting for." Emily was taken aback. She had no idea what the man meant by that, but the words struck her. What was she being dragged into? A part of her wanted to turn and leave, to retreat back to the familiar quiet of her coffee shop where life made sense, where she could at least control the chaos. But something deep inside her told her she needed to stay. This was important. One of the women, a kind-faced middle-aged woman with a loose bun, waved Emily over to an empty chair. "Please sit. We were just talking about community change, and it seems like you might be someone who can help us." Emily sat down, still unsure of what they expected from her, but sensing an opportunity she couldn't let go of. The elderly man, who appeared to be the leader of the group, leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. "We've been struggling here for years. This town, it's been slowly dying. People move out, businesses close down, and the next generation has no hope for the future. But we believe there's a way to turn things around, and the key to that is unity." He paused, and Emily could see the weariness in his eyes. This was not just a man passionate about a cause. This was a man who had seen too many dreams fade away. "Emily, the man who left you the note, he's part of something bigger. We're a group of people trying to create a new kind of foundation for our town. A foundation built on kindness, giving, and trust. The man who gave you the note, He's been helping us for months, guiding us toward this very moment. We believe he's someone who understands how life works, how sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can ripple out and change everything. Emily's head spun. The man from the diner, the one she had given a meal to, was somehow connected to this. And now she was being pulled into this strange network of people who were seemingly trying to rebuild an entire town. Her heart fluttered with both excitement and fear. What was happening? "I don't understand," Emily said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why me? Why am I involved?" The elderly man nodded, as though he had been expecting the question. "You've already started the process, Emily. By giving him that meal, by showing kindness without expecting anything in return, you've already taken the first step. The note was a message to you, but it wasn't just for you. It's for everyone who believes that things can get better if we just have enough faith." Another man, a younger one with sharp eyes and a quiet intensity, spoke up. "The world's been telling people that kindness doesn't pay, that helping others is a waste of time, but the truth is, we need each other. We need to help, to give, and that's how we'll change this town, one small act at a time. But we need someone with vision, someone who's been through hardship and understands what it feels like to struggle. That's where you come in." Emily felt her chest tighten. Someone with vision. Was that really her? She had always felt small, like her life was just a tiny part of the grand scheme of things. But this was different. These people, strangers to her, saw something in her that she didn't see in herself. The leader smiled at her, sensing her confusion. "You don't have to have all the answers right now. Just know that this is your call to action. This is your chance to become part of something that will change everything." The words settled over Emily like a weight, but in a strange way, it was a weight that felt right. The quiet uncertainty that had hung over her for so long was slowly shifting into something else, something stronger, something more purposeful. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she could make a difference. As the meeting went on, the group explained their plans in more detail. They wanted to create community programs, restore abandoned properties, and revitalize the town's heart. They wanted to bring people together, to show them that there was hope, even in the darkest of times. And they needed Emily's help. "You'll be the one to spread the message," the elderly man said. "You've already shown that you have the heart for it. You're the one who can lead the charge. Will you help us?" Emily took a deep breath. She had never been asked to do something so big, so meaningful. But looking around the room at the faces of these determined people, she felt a spark of possibility she hadn't felt in years. For the first time in what felt like forever, Emily allowed herself to hope. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was a road she now felt ready to walk. As Emily walked back to her diner that evening, the weight of the conversation lingered in her mind. The air had grown cooler, and the town around her seemed quieter, almost as if it, too, were waiting for something to shift. She had been asked to step into something bigger than herself, to lead a change she never expected to be part of. The thought made her nervous, but it also gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. That night, after closing the diner, Emily sat at her small kitchen table, staring at the old note left by the hungry man. The note that had started all of this. It was simple, just a few lines of handwriting, but the words had taken root in her heart. The smallest act of kindness can change everything. Believe in yourself, and you will inspire others to believe too. It seemed like such a simple message, yet Emily couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. What had that old man known that she didn't? What had he seen in her that made him think she could lead this movement, this transformation. She ran her fingers over the paper, taking in the words again. Believe in yourself. Could she really do that? Could she be the one to lead this town to something better? The question felt like a challenge, one that she wasn't sure she was ready to face. But the next morning, as she unlocked the doors to the diner and took in the familiar sight of the empty street, something shifted within her. There were a few more people walking along the sidewalk, the bustle of the town slowly coming to life. The feeling of stagnation that had clung to her for so long was beginning to dissipate. Maybe, just maybe, the town could change. Maybe she could be the one to spark that change. She turned the sign to "Open" and went inside, ready to start the day. But as she glanced out the window, she noticed something. A man standing outside, looking hesitant, as if he didn't know whether to enter. He was young, wearing a jacket that seemed too thin for the chilly morning, and his eyes scanned the diner's window before he finally stepped inside. "Good morning," Emily greeted him with a warm smile, trying to shake off the lingering nervousness. "What can I get for you?" The man, still standing by the door, looked around nervously. He was thin, his face gaunt, and there was an unmistakable air of hunger about him. He shifted from foot to foot, clearly unsure of whether he should take a seat or leave. I just need something warm," he said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. "I don't have much to pay." Emily paused. It wasn't uncommon for people to come in with little money, and there had been times when she'd helped someone out, given them a meal or a cup of coffee. But something in his eyes, a deep weariness that seemed to match her own, made her heart ache. Without thinking, she stepped around the counter. "You don't have to pay. I'll make you something. Take a seat." The man's eyes widened in surprise. He hesitated for a moment, then sat at the counter. Emily turned to the stove, her hands working almost automatically. She made him a steaming bowl of soup and a sandwich, the warmth of the food filling the small diner. As she placed the meal in front of him, the man looked up at her, his eyes filled with gratitude. You're sure? I don't want to owe you anything." Emily smiled gently. "No one should have to go hungry. Just eat, that's all." He nodded, his hands trembling as he picked up the spoon. He ate quietly, occasionally glancing at Emily as though he couldn't quite believe that someone would offer him kindness without asking for anything in return. As he finished his meal, he looked up at her with a serious expression. "Thank you. You don't know what this means. I've been on the streets for a while now. I've been trying to get back on my feet, but it's hard, you know. People look at you differently when you don't have anything." Emily sat across from him, her heart heavy with the truth of his words. "I know," she said softly. "I know exactly what you mean. It's hard to feel like you matter when everything around you feels like it's falling apart." The man nodded, his eyes distant. "I've been trying to survive, trying to find a way out. But sometimes it feels like the world has forgotten people like me." Emily's heart tightened. She knew that feeling too well. In a way, she had been stuck in a similar place, caught between hope and despair, wondering if things would ever get better. He stood up to leave, and as he walked toward the door, he turned back to her. "You're different, you know. You're not like the others. Most people wouldn't have helped me, but you did. Thank you." As the man left, Emily stood there for a moment, letting his words sink in. She had helped him without hesitation, just as she had helped that old man in the past. But it was more than just a meal. It was the connection, the act of showing someone that they mattered, that they were seen. She realized in that moment that this was the ripple effect. One act of kindness had the power to change someone's day, someone's life. And if she kept going, if she kept believing, she could help change this town. Emily turned back to the kitchen, her hands shaking with the enormity of what lay ahead. She didn't have all the answers, but she was beginning to see the path. It wasn't about fixing everything overnight, but about creating a foundation of hope, one meal, one person at a time. The day passed slowly, but each time someone entered the diner, Emily offered a warm smile and a kind word. She no longer saw herself as just a diner owner. She was a part of something much larger. The change that had started with a hungry man's note was beginning to take shape in her own heart. Days turned into weeks, and the small acts of kindness Emily had begun to offer others continued to ripple through the town. The diner, once quiet and empty, now buzzed with a steady stream of customers. People came in not just for food, but for the warmth of Emily's heart, for the kindness she offered to anyone who walked through the door. But it wasn't just the diner that was changing. Emily began to see her town in a new light. People started talking to one another again, sharing stories, offering help where it was needed. The hopelessness that had once gripped the streets seemed to lift, replaced with a sense of community that had been missing for years. It was as if Emily had sparked a fire, and the whole town was warming its hands by it. One rainy afternoon, as Emily was cleaning the counter, the door chimed, and a familiar face stepped inside. It was the young man from the morning she'd given him a meal. This time, he looked different. His eyes were no longer hollow, his shoulders no longer slumped. He wore a coat that looked a little too big for him, but it was clean, and his smile was brighter than it had been the last time they spoke. "Good to see you," Emily said, her voice warm with recognition. He smiled, but this time it wasn't the hesitant, grateful smile of someone who had just received a free meal. It was a smile of someone who had found hope, someone who had begun to rebuild. "I got a job," he said, his voice filled with pride. "I found work at a local shop. I'm finally back on my feet." Tears pricked at Emily's eyes as she looked at him. She had helped him, yes, but she had no idea how much that meal had meant to him, how much it had sparked a change in him. The man's transformation wasn't just about food. It was about the belief that someone cared enough to see him as a person, not as a statistic or a burden. But he wasn't done yet. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. He placed it on the counter in front of her. "This is for you," he said softly. Emily raised an eyebrow, confused. "For me? I didn't do anything special." "Yes, you did," he replied. "You didn't just feed me that day. You gave me hope. You gave me a reason to believe that I wasn't invisible." She opened the envelope, her hands trembling. Inside was a check, a generous one, far more than she had expected. But it wasn't the amount that left her speechless. It was the note inside the envelope. "Thank you for showing me kindness when I had nothing to give. Here's something to help you, just like you helped me. I hope it helps you change the world, one person at a time." Emily's breath caught in her throat. She had never imagined that her small act of kindness would lead to something like this. But more than that, she had never imagined the profound effect it would have on herself. She wasn't just helping others. She was helping herself too, rediscovering the strength she thought she had lost long ago. The diner, once a place of solitude, had become a beacon of hope. Emily had not only changed the lives of the people around her, but she had also changed her own life. The generosity of that man had set her on a path she could never have predicted, and in turn, she had helped countless others find their way. As the weeks passed, Emily continued to serve her meals, but now, with a deeper understanding of what it meant to truly help. She no longer saw herself as just a woman running a diner. She was a catalyst for change, a leader in her community, and most importantly, a person who had rediscovered the power of kindness. One night, as she closed up the diner, Emily stood at the window, looking out at the now bustling town. The streets were alive with activity, and for the first time in years, Emily felt a deep peace settle in her heart. She had made a difference. Her simple act of kindness had ignited a spark that had lit up not only her world, but the worlds of everyone around her. She smiled softly to herself. She had no idea where this journey would take her next, but one thing was certain: she would never stop believing in the power of kindness. As we come to the end of Emily's journey, we see how a small act of kindness, like offering a meal to someone in need, can have a lasting and profound impact on not just the person receiving the kindness, but the one giving it, and even an entire community. Emily's diner was no longer just a place to eat. It was a place where hope was served with every dish, where people found not only food, but a renewed sense of possibility. We all have the power to make a difference, even when we think we have nothing left to give. Kindness is a gift that multiplies, and sometimes the simplest gestures can change lives in ways we never imagined. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more inspiring stories of kindness, transformation, and hope, don't forget to subscribe to Stories of Hope for more incredible tales. Let's continue to spread hope together.